I'm going to talk about why I'm done with Craftsman. Let's start off with, I used to love Craftsman. In fact, so these tools are, most of them, other than this breaker bar. I bought this breaker bar, and I bought this 19mm impact socket, and I bought them together for a specific purpose. But the rest of these tools are my grandfather's. My grandfather, he pretty much just bought Craftsman, and the reason was they were made in the U.S. He'd just go down to Sears, and he knew that they weren't overly expensive, but they had the Craftsman warranty. They were made in the USA, and they worked, and so pretty much all of my grandfather's tools were Craftsman. I mean, I've been finding a couple other brands, but for the most part, that's what he bought, and these are just a few things I got after he died. There's an old drill. Here's another drill. Here's a saw. Drill bit extender. So he just, and then when I grew up, what did my dad have? He pretty much just had Craftsman tools. It's like a bead and corner round bit, carbide tipped. That's a router bit. Like the only mechanic tools I ever used when I was a kid was my dad's set of Craftsman tools. He had Craftsman wrenches, Craftsman sockets, Craftsman box wrenches or combination wrenches, and that's all he had, and that's all he still has them. I don't think he's ever broken them. So I just grew up using Craftsman tools, and when my dad or my grandpa needed a new tool, they would go down to the Sears and they would pick out one. They knew that they didn't have to worry if it was good or not. For the most part, they worked. And the best part was that you knew that it was made in the U.S., so you were supporting U.S. workers. And then when I got, when I left the house, that's pretty much what I started looking at buying. My best man and best friend at my wedding, he gave me a Husky socket set, which I still use a lot, and I've used for 19 years. And when I needed a new toolbox or a small toolbox to put it in, what did I do? I bought a Craftsman box. I know it's not big, but that's what I had. That's what I got. And then when I repaid the favor, I bought him a set of Craftsman sockets when he got married. And luckily for him, they were made in the USA sockets and not the foreign ones. But despite the brand loyalty that I had, and a lot of people, they love Craftsman, despite that, I'm done with Craftsman tools. And the reason is because the newer ones, they're not as good, or they're as good as something, they could be as good as a couple different brands, but then they're more expensive than other brands. They're not made in the US. And so to me, it's just not worth buying anymore or ever again. I don't know. I mean, I know that Lowe's has come out with the brand. They're trying to revitalize it, or maybe they're not trying to revitalize it. They're trying to capitalize on a name, right? And they're trying to set themselves apart, and hoping that all of us who grew up with Craftsman, that we're brand loyal enough to, just buy it straight from them, regardless of where they get them from. But the thing is that, if I want a tool that's made in Taiwan, I'm not going to. Oh, I forgot this one. One of my favorite screwdrivers. Anyways, if we're gonna, if I want to buy a tool from Taiwan, which actually, if you think about it, the Sears Craftsman that Ace Hardware still sells, the original brand, they, all of their stuff is made in China, not in Taiwan. And if I want to buy China stuff, then it's Harbor Freight, and Harbor Freight has Taiwan sockets, and so that's even better. But the thing is what's the price difference for the same quality? It's half as much for the same quality stuff coming out of the same country. And then that Taiwan stuff, there's many high quality Taiwan brands. You got Gear Wrench, you've got Tekton, you have other ones that I'm escaping my head right now. Coming out of China, you have, I think Husky's made in China. I don't know if they're made in Taiwan anymore, or if they're made in Taiwan. They used to be. My Husky said it was all made in the USA, but they went to China. And so, Husky's one of the cheapest ones. Oh, you have the one from Napa, the Carlisle. That's made in Taiwan, high quality brand. They're about the same price as the new Craftsman stuff that's coming out of Taiwan, and even the Craftsman stuff that's coming out of China. Right? Which one am I going to buy? And so when I look at my options, and I'm not looking at made in the USA, what are my choices? I'm not going to pick Craftsman. I'm going to pick Gear Wrench. I'm going to pick Tekton. I'm going to pick Carlisle. And so, Craftsman, they let us down, I think. They let me down. I think they did. And so I'm not going to be loyal. I'm going to go somewhere else. And really the only thing that's going to bring me back to Craftsman is if they're made in the USA. And, I look at the USA made tools. I look at Wright. I look at SK. The cheaper, the cheaper USA made tools that are still very high quality, and they're more expensive than Gear Wrench, and they're more expensive than pretty much all the other tool brands that are made in Taiwan. And that's because manufacturing in the United States costs more, right? And kind of wish, maybe Sears and Craftsman back not that long ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, decided where the market was going was foreign made tools, and then they're going to go that way, not knowing that their customer base really, the reason they liked them was because they're made in the USA and they're high quality. But what are you going to do? So, but anyways, I guess my point is that if they come back, sure, they can go back up to a higher cost, even higher than what they left at, and as long as they're comparable to Wright and to SK, and I don't know if Proto is still kicking, or if Stanley's pretty much gutted them and made them a foreign tool company. It would be nice if Stanley kept them as the premium, their premium made in the USA tools brand. Obviously the Cornwell and the Mac and the Matco, and obviously the Snap-on, they're just, I don't know, they're just way too expensive. Especially when I could get, unless they have a tool that's special that nobody else has, which is not really true. Even the really specialty tools that Snap-on has, there's other companies that have it, like OTC. But the special Snap-on sockets, I think Wright just as good. and their wrenches, I think Wright's wrenches are just as good. Wright doesn't have as big of a selection as Snap-on. And I don't know, I mean, Craftsman, they had a huge selection, and maybe that was part of the problem. Is they went out too far. Of course, they never really made their own, right? They always, Craftsman always had somebody else make their tools, and maybe that was it. You know, they didn't have control over their manufacturing, and so if something changed, they had to react to it instead of control it. And whereas SK and Wright, they make their own wrenches, they make their own sockets. Snap-on makes their own sockets. I think Cornwell does. I'm not sure. I think Mac does. I think Matco is a rebrander like Craftsman was. But if Craftsman the only way I'm gonna go back to Craftsman anytime ever is if they do that. They maybe they contract with well, even then, I mean, they'd have to compare. The price has to compare with the USA made tools. Otherwise, if they make them more expensive, I'm not going to go back, because I'll just buy the USA made tools that are cheaper, right? That's why if I look at a Craftsman tool now, it's a Chinese made tool, or they have a few that are the new sets coming into Lowe's. Some of them are Taiwan, but even then, their prices are above, their Chinese stuff is above what a Chinese socket set costs, which is, you go to Home Depot and you buy a Husky set with a really good warranty, and it's all in China, and it's probably one of the cheapest socket sets out there, there's so many other brands that make in Taiwan that are better than any of the Taiwan sets at Lowe's for Craftsman. And the Craftsman sets are not, when I'm looking at the Craftsman sets at Lowe's, and a lot of people are complaining about this, they're not complete sets, which means they're not made for any serious use. So, I'm going to Harbor Freight. I'm going to Napa. I'm going to go to Home Depot. I'm going to Lowe's. I'm going to there's a local store I have here that sells Tecton, and I can buy 1 or 2 sockets of Tecton, and their Tecton's slowly coming out with more stuff that's made in the USA. They have USA made pliers, they have USA made screwdrivers. Another thing that I was thinking about is that, mostly what I've been talking about is the hand tools, sockets and whatnot. But I've noticed that Craftsman, mostly, Stanley Black & Decker with the Craftsman brand, has been trying to push a lot of the new electronic, or the new battery powered tools, the drills and the saws and, that whole line. But again, it's I think that's a saturated market, and there's so many choices that that I don't need to even think about Craftsman, because they don't have anything that's innovative. If I wanted to stay with, if I felt like buying from Stanley Black & Decker, right? If I wanted to buy a cheap electric drill, I would just go to Walmart and I'd buy a Black & Decker one. Or if I wanted to spend a little bit more money, I would buy the DeWalt brand, both in the same, owned by the same company. I wouldn't go, I'm not going to go buy the Craftsman one because they have everything in those other two. But even then, realistically, I'm not going to buy, generally if I want to buy the cheap end, I generally go to Ryobi. If I want to buy a little bit better, I go to Rigid at Home Depot, and if I want better than Rigid, then I'll usually go to Milwaukee, not necessarily to DeWalt. I'm not knocking DeWalt. I think it's been a good brand. Hopefully Stanley doesn't ruin it. But there's just nothing. There's no reason to buy Craftsman. Even, you know, their new hand tools are and their new, all their electrical stuff is, you know, it's in a saturated market with lots of competition. So, you know, what am I going to do? I'm not going to buy Craftsman anymore. So I feel for Craftsman. I loved them. I grew up with them. That's what I learned how to use, was Craftsman sockets, Craftsman ratchets, Craftsman wrenches, and that's what I'm done with them. So Craftsman, I wish you well. I hope you change, but it doesn't look like you are. It just looks like you're changing ownership but doing the same thing. You know, if I want to buy I'd rather buy a Stanley socket than a Craftsman one. I'd rather buy a DeWalt, you know, the DeWalt wrenches. I'd rather buy a Proto before I go to Craftsman, and that's from the same company. So Stanley's not listening to me, so it doesn't matter. Anyways, thanks for listening to my rant. Goodbye.